Now, the killing fields of Syria have claimed 500,000 lives over the past 7 years, displaced millions and turned millions more into refugees. But amidst the relentless carnage, about which they've managed to do nothing, Western leaders still retain a special revulsion for the use of chemical weapons. So when pictures appeared of civilians, including many children, suffering and dying from a chemical attack in a rebel-held suburb of Damascus, this atrocity wildly placed at the door of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, the consensus among leaders in Washington, London and Paris was that a military response was essential. So over 100 cruise missiles were launched by the US, the UK and France on Syrian chemical weapons facilities, a retaliation which did enjoy the backing of all their major allies. But journalist and author Peter Hitchens begs to differ. This is his take of the week.
We all know the old cliché that truth is the first casualty of war, but how often do we recognize that we are ourselves to blame for this? In normal times, wise people doubt the words of governments and suspect propaganda, but when the jet engines begin to roar, they believe atrocity stories. They demand that we must go out and bomb somebody. Anyone with any doubt is denounced as a wicked apologist for the undoubted monster Assad and must hang his head in shame. What we seem to forget is that Assad's opponents and would-be replacements are blood-stained jihadis who we would arrest if we found them in Birmingham. We somehow managed to forget that our overthrow of the monsters Saddam in Iraq and Gaddafi in Libya led directly to the migration crisis, now convulsing Europe. And we put out of our minds the likelihood that more intervention in Syria will prolong that war, not end it. I have absolutely no idea what happened in Douma near Damascus on the 7th of April. Most of the reports I've read or seen were prepared by people at least 70 miles away from uncheckable, unidentified sources. And because I tediously take the trouble to read the reports of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, such as this one, I know how hard it is to attribute blame in such cases. And I'm still waiting for a justification for the use of force.
Thanks to the Hill Garden and Pergola in Hampstead. Welcome, Peter Hitchens, back to the programme. So Peter says he's still waiting for a reason for the justification of the use of force. Pretty Patel, what is it?
I think it's the humanitarian basis in terms of what we've seen. Children and families being gassed, and it's not the first time we've seen this happen on successive occasions over the last few years. And I thought, Peter, I have to say, your view was very compelling when you spoke about the number of people that have been displaced and everything else. But the reality is, this attack was very much about depleting the chemical weapon supplies, not attacking the country, people, or talking about regime change.
Peter Hitchens.
Well, it's an alleged attack. We don't actually know what took place. And the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has only just begun its inquiries. And we constantly, well, I think they're there now, but that's a complicated question, which let's not go into now. But what I can tell you is that I looked in great detail into the Khan Sheikhoun episode a year ago, where most people maintain that there was an attack and that it was conducted by the Assad government. In fact, if you look at the report, it's full of doubts. The OPCW never went, their fact-finding team never went to Khan Sheikhoun. There is no reliable custody chain. The report itself and the Joint Investigative Mechanism report, which followed it, are full of weird contradictions, strange, inappropriate medical treatments, samples that don't add up, no custody chain. I simply think that on the basis...
Are you in any doubt that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons?
I don't know. I think on the areas that I've actually looked at, it seems to me that hard evidence is lacking. And you have to.
Well, hold on. You say hard evidence.
A very simple point here.
There have been 85 documented chemical attacks since 2011. 85.
Yes.
So who's behind them?
Have you looked at these documents yourself?
Yes, I have.
Well, what do you find when you look at them? Do you find conclusive?
So the Human Rights Watch group, backed up by 7 independent sources of corroboration, is just making it up.
I didn't say that. You can say that if you want to. I said nothing of the kind. What I'm saying is much as Alan's former government colleague, Admiral Lord West, said. It's very odd that President Assad should behave in this way, given it's the one guaranteed way of getting the United States to take the side of the rebels against him. And it doesn't add... The same argument is made by Peter Ford, Her Britannic Majesty's former ambassador to Syria, who knows Assad and has lived in the place. He can't understand why this would be an intelligent thing for him to do. And Assad may be very bad, but
Alan Johnson. But I'm assuming, Peter, that if there was a chemical weapons attack, and if that chemical weapons attack came from the Assad regime, that you would be supporting what's happening. The problem with the film is...
Well, let's find out if that's true.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily... I don't think that it's a particularly powerful moral response to the killing of innocent civilians to hurl high explosive into a densely populated area. No, I wouldn't necessarily support the action chosen. It's what most people thought we would do. And if we didn't do it, it was because there was a sudden...
Well, let's leave aside what most people thought we would do.
Leave that aside. You weren't even asked as members of Parliament whether we should do it or not.
A separate issue.
Well, it isn't a separate issue.
Related issue, but separate.
The rush to judgment.
Your film starts on a false premise that the British public actually want to see the bomb. Actually, you probably speak for the British public on this. In fact, all the polling I've shown it was very sceptical about any attack.
Well, I wasn't referring to the British public, actually.
And as for the chemical weapons inspectors, as you know, they cannot apportion blame. All they can do is to say whether there's been a chemical weapons attack. The reason they can't apportion blame is that last year Russia blocked that as an addition to their remit. So we won't get them telling us who did it.
Can I just point out
it seems to me, hold on, Peter, it seems to me
true.
From everything I've heard, and yes, I wasn't there. You're getting it from aid workers. You're getting it from all the people who you kind of trust on these things, the NGOs, etc., is that there was a chemical attack. Helicopters were used. None of the various groups, and I agree with you about not seeking regime change, by the way. I agree with that bit of your argument. But none of these groups possess any helicopters. And one thing's for sure, everyone living in that area around Douma says there were helicopters all over the place.
Well, a helicopter wouldn't be conclusive in anything. Helicopters can drop all kinds of things or not drop anything at all. It wouldn't. The fact is that, and I wasn't referring to the British public, actually, in my criticism. I was referring to the almost unanimous collapse of the media and of the world of politics into acceptance of something which they had no real proof of. And I've been astonished by it. This is a country which made a huge mess of Iraq, which made an immense mess of Libya, in which intelligent people have for long years known about the disaster of Suez and the lies sold over that, and the Gulf of Tonkin, and there's so many instances. And yet suddenly all of the newspapers and the politicians who might once have been relied upon to say, hang on, could we not just wait a minute? Isn't this just a little bit too convenient? Couldn't we just wait for the proof? Didn't say a thing and joined in a kind of compassionate... I said I wouldn't support the action proposed. So what does it matter? I said I wouldn't support the action proposed. It matters because, of course, you take action against the use of chemical weapons.
So what would you do?
No, I haven't finished my point. You've interrupted me before I finished. What you got was this kind of rush into a sort of compassionate jingoism, where everybody was saying, well, I'm so compassionate, I want to bomb Syria. I don't know what I'd do. I'm not. For a start, I mean, my general view is that you take the evidence first, the verdict second, and the sentence last. You're asking me to come up with a sentence before there's even been evidence.
Pretty Patel, what? Well, you don't think there's been evidence. That's another matter.
No, it is. No, it's not that I don't think there's been evidence.
No, you don't think there's evidence.
The OPCW, the only body...
They haven't been there yet.
Well, exactly, so there is no... And yet...
Because the Russians kept them out.
No, it's not because the Russians kept them out. They have not... It was nothing to do with the Russians keeping them out. The British government and the American government and the French government acted last week before there was any attempt to find out what had actually happened. Any attempt at all.
Yeah.
Patel, I'm still trying to work... What is the consequence of that attack, though? So we hit 3 different sites, which we think were chemical weapons storage areas. The Assad regime, within 24 hours, was back attacking the rebels. What's actually been achieved?
Well, I think... if I can just come back to some of Peter's points,
well,
and Andrew, no, I will.
Quite nice to get an answer to that question because it's important.
The point is that, you know, this was to deplete the chemical weapons supplies, a targeted attack, because we have seen, to Peter's point, successive use and repeated use of chemical warfare on the Syrian people, on children and families. And this isn't a new phenomenon at all. This is a conflict that's been going on for 8 years.
But we haven't destroyed his whole capability, have we?
Well, not the total capability, no.
To do it, no.
No, and that
he could do it again.
That could be a possibility, but of course it was about the signal, the message that this would send out by having this particular attack, that we would not sit back and just sort of, you know, accept more repeated and sustained attacks on Syrian civilians. And I think it's worth pointing out as well that we do live in a world where there are international norms, where there's a rules-based system. You know, collectively the world said no to the use of chemical weapons a hell of a long time ago. And surely we should be actually trying to uphold those rules and values at the same time.
Could I ask you a question? Do you know the name of the organisation which was in control of Douma at the time of the alleged attack?
No, I don't.
Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam. Do you know that in 2016 Jaish al-Islam was accused of using chemical weapons against Kurds in Aleppo, and accused quite strongly? And I'm not saying that it's not proven. It's no more proven than the other event. But it seems to me this rush to judgment is taking place. People are rushing. Don't even know the most basic facts about the situation on the ground.
The rebels
where
in
it happened
Douma,
are rushing to judgment.
After the chemical attack, the rebels in Douma immediately surrendered and were put on the surrender buses. So it's kind of unlikely it would have been them. But you've speculated.
You say it's unlikely.
Well, I've said
but on what basis? But
because they surrendered.
They surrendered because his chemical weapons
worked. They were on the point of surrender anyway.
Unfortunately.
Well, that's
the argument was about the handover of the heavy weapons.
Just to get where you're coming from. You said you don't want to speculate. You don't know.
I don't.
But you've speculated that Western countries can fake such attacks.
I haven't said anything of the kind.
Yes, you did. You said, speaking of Britain, in your blog, speaking of Britain, France and America, you could say there might be a temptation to fake such attacks. If these major nations, talking about us, America and France, will act in defiance of law, to fake them, must surely be a temptation.
It must surely be a temptation among the Islamist groups in Syria if the Western countries are prepared to mount attacks on Syria on the basis. Well, you interrupt me at every point. If the Western countries,
that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I absolutely do not. That's a complete fabrication. I have said that the people who would be prepared to fake the attacks would be the Islamist groups. If it is the case that Western countries could be persuaded into it, you've got to check your researcher on that.
I've read the blog myself.
They've given you a bump.
If these major nations will act in defiance of law, a fake attack, must surely be a temptation. That's what you wrote.
It's a temptation to whom?
The major nations.
No, that's not what it says. Go and read it yourself instead of relying on some researcher.
I did. You have got it wrong. I read it myself.
Well, I was giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Maybe you should write more clearly next time.
I've given you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay,
you've got it wrong.
I got it wrong.
Say that.
Perhaps because your English isn't very clear.
Well, perhaps. I don't think that's a characteristic I have.
It's late. Govey and Andrew Lloyd Webber.